Today we're going to talk about lesson 2.2, okay? Last time we talked about lesson 1.1. It was using inductive reasoning to make conjectures. So today we're going to talk about what is a conditional statement. When you hear the word conditional, what do you think of? ¿Quién me dice? When you hear the word conditional, what do you think is the meaning of that word? Or what do you think is a condition or a conditional? ¿Alguien me puede decir? Nadie sabe lo que es condition. Have you heard the word conditional? No? Okay, so we're going to talk about a conditional statement. Okay? When we talk about a statement, it's something that you say that can be written or you say it. Okay? So when we talk about a conditional statement, let me go to this fast. Okay, so the objectives of today's lesson are identify, write, and analyze the truth value of conditional statements, and write the inverse, converse, and contrapositive of a conditional statement. So we are continuing. This is very similar to what we talked Tuesday about in lesson 2.1. Using inductive reasoning to make conjectures. So this is the vocabulary word that we're gonna focus on today. Conditional statement, hypothesis, conclusion, true value, negation, converse, inverse, contrapositive, and logically equivalent statement. Okay. So first we have to start defining or saying the definitions of these three words. Okay. A conditional statement is a statement that can be written in the form if P then Q. Okay. So that's what we talk about a conditional statement. Okay, we're gonna see this in some examples. Okay, the hypothesis, we have heard that word in science. Okay, the hypothesis is the part P of a conditional statement following the word if. Okay, so the hypothesis is the part of a conditional statement. Okay, the hypothesis in science is a possible question to an answer. Okay, or to a question. Okay. So that's what we talk about hypothesis, okay? So the conclusion, the word said, is the part Q of a conditional statement following the word then. So the first part of a conditional statement is called the hypothesis, okay? And the second part of a conditional statement is called the conclusion, okay? So we're gonna see now how can we see this in some examples, okay? Any questions about these words? Very similar to what they are in science. Okay. Okay. Questions? No? Okay. So by phrasing a conjecture that we saw in last class, okay. Okay, Nareli, no te preocupes. As an if-then statement, you can quickly identify his hypothesis and conclusion. Okay. So we're gonna see conjecture. Okay, so let's see those examples. Okay, identifying the parts of a conditional statement. Okay, identify the hypothesis and conclusion of each conditional statement. Okay, can someone read the first one, A? You also have other examples on your textbook on page 81. Can someone read example A? Gustavo Caban, ¿puede leerlo? Sí. Okay, thank you. So if today is Thanksgiving Day, then today is Thursday. Who can tell me what's the hypothesis? Okay, so the hypothesis is today is Thanksgiving Day. Okay, the first part of the conditional statement is the hypothesis in this case. Okay, so what is the conclusion? Well, then today is Thursday. Okay, so this is not hard. It's just identify like the hypothesis is the first part of the conditional statement, and the conclusion is the last statement of the conditional statement. So if the hypothesis is like the question, like the possible answer to a question, today is Thanksgiving Day. Well, you can conclude that today is Thursday. Okay. It's not hard, okay? It's just like you read the sentence and you identify what is the hypothesis or the possible answer to a question, and the conclusion is the last statement of the conditional. Okay. Okay. So let's see B. A number is a rational number if it is an integer. Okay. Who can tell me what's the hypothesis based on example A in problem B or example B? Exactly. Who said that? ¿Quién dijo eso? Thank you, Ana. Okay. So let's see it. Okay. A number is an integer. Okay. Aquí está al revés. Ah, ¿no te diste cuenta? A number is an integer. Okay. Y la conclusión, ¿cuál es? Is a rational number. Okay. Vieron, aquí está al revés. Tenemos que leer, ¿verdad? Identificar, okay, porque puede cambiar, okay. So the conclusion is the number is a rational number. Okay. ¿Entendimos? So example A say if today is Thanksgiving Day, then today is Thursday. Okay. So the hypothesis today is Thanksgiving Day. So we can say that that statement is gonna be, well, today is Thursday. Okay. So we have to read it again. A number is a rational number if it is an integer. Okay. So we have to start the hypothesis by saying a number is an integer. Okay. Then we can conclude that the number is a rational number because you know an integer is a rational number. Okay. ¿Entendimos esos dos ejemplos? So we got to read it very carefully and then answer. Okay. In your textbooks, there is another example. I'm going to read it. Okay. In your textbook on page 81, we got two other conditional statements. I'm going to read them. Okay. Example A in your text would say, if a butterfly has a curved black line on his hind wing, then it is a viceroy. Okay. So the hypothesis is the first part of the conditional statement. If a butterfly has a curved black line on his hind wing, the conclusion is the butterfly is a viceroy. Okay. So you see, sometimes the hypothesis is at the beginning of the conditional statement, sometimes it's at the end, or sometimes the opposite. Okay. Let's read example B. I don't know if you're following on your textbook. A number is an integer if it is a natural number. So this happens at the example B that we have read on the presentation. A number is an integer if it is a natural number. So the hypothesis in this example is a number is a natural number, and the conclusion is if the number is an integer. Okay, preguntas de eso. So this is basically how we work with identify hypothesis and conclusion. Okay, so let's see this other example. Valeria, can you read it? Valeria Pagan. Okay, Valeria, can you say what is the hypothesis? ¿Verdad? ¿Cuál tú crees que es la hipótesis de ese conditional statement? Okay. So excellent. A number is divisible by 6. So the conclusion is divisible by 3. Okay. A number is divisible by 3. Okay. So excellent. The hypothesis was at the end of the conditional statement. So we have to be very carefully how we read it. Okay. A number is divisible if it is. So that's what we said. Let me review this very quick. That's what we see in the definition. Let me write them again. Okay. The definition of hypothesis was that we say it is the part P, okay, is, let me define this very quick, is the part P, es la parte P, okay, is the part P of a conditional statement following the word if. You see? Following the word if. So you have to identify in the sentence where do you see that word if. Okay. So where do we see if in this example? Can someone tell me? Why do we know that that is the hypothesis? It is divisible by 6. Because where is the word if? Can someone tell me, please? You see it here? No lo ve, mi gente. Mírenlo aquí, okay? If you see that word if, that means this is the hypothesis, okay? So the definition of a conclusion is the part P, or the part Q, sorry, of the statement. Le estoy dando el la para que usted lo identifique fácilmente. No tiene que adivinar, mi gente. ¿Verdad? Hay una clave, so you can see it. Is the part Q, sorry, is the part Q following the word. Let's see the word that is followed. Following the word then. Okay? So we don't have the word then there, but if we see if, we know that this is going to be the hypothesis, and the other part of the sentence or the conditional statement is going to be the conclusion. Okay? Entendimos, mi gente? So we got to see, or we got to look for these two words, if and then. Okay? Any questions about this? Estamos. So that's how you identify a hypothesis and a conclusion. If you see the word if, you automatically say that's the hypothesis. If you see the word then, well, that's the conclusion. Okay? Estamos, mi gente. Okay. Perfecto. So that's the clue, or the what you're gonna look for the words. Okay. So we can say that many sentences without the words if and then can be written as conditional. So to do so, identify the sentence hypothesis and conclusion by figuring out which part of the statement depend on the other. So that's very important. So if we don't see the words if and then, we got to read the sentence so we can say which part of the statement depends on the other. So the conclusion depends on the hypothesis. So that's very important that we know it, because the first part of the conditional statement is called the hypothesis. So the conclusion depends on the hypothesis. So that's very important that we know it. For example, write a conditional statement from the following. Okay, let's see this example. We got example 2a. It says an obtuse triangle has exactly one obtuse angle. Okay, so let's identify the hypothesis and the conclusion. Who can tell me what's the hypothesis? Let's read it again. An obtuse triangle has exactly one obtuse angle. So the hypothesis is an obtuse triangle. And the conclusion is that it has exactly one obtuse angle. Okay? If a triangle is obtuse, then it has exactly one obtuse angle. Okay? So that's how we identify hypothesis and conclusion if we don't got the words if and then. Okay, so we got to be careful. If we don't see the words if and the word then, we got to read it so we can see what is the hypothesis and what is the conclusion. So the hypothesis, the conclusion depends on the hypothesis, because we say first, if a triangle is obtuse, then it has exactly one obtuse angle. You see? So we make this conditional statement, okay? We are writing, by looking at a sentence, we're writing a conditional statement. So what do we change? We change the order, okay? If a triangle is obtuse and the original said an obtuse triangle, you see, we change the order. If a triangle is obtuse, then why did we put then after if a triangle is obtuse? Why did we write the word then? ¿Por qué escribimos then después de if a triangle is obtuse? ¿Quién me dice? Why the word then means? ¿Qué significa ese then? Lo leímos ahorita. What is the meaning of the word? ¿Verdad? Then, exacto. Then means it has exactly one obtuse angle. So we can identify very clear here that by writing a conditional statement, we said that this then makes this or identify it like this is the conclusion, okay? And the first part of the sentence in this case is the hypothesis, okay? So we make, by reading this sentence, we made this statement a conditional statement, okay? Any questions about this? Okay, so we got to be very careful where to use if and this, okay? Let's continue. Okay, so let's see this example. Write a conditional statement from the following, okay? So you remember that we said, or we saw that this is the part Q and this is the part P. So we said in the hypothesis is the part P of a conditional statement following the word if. And the conclusion is the part Q of a conditional statement following the word then. So what statement or what conditional statement we can write from this example? Who can tell me? For example, we can write that the inner oval represents the hypothesis. Why? Because that's the part P, okay? So we know this. And the outer oval represents the conclusion, okay? Why we know that? Because the inner oval, ¿verdad? El óvalo que está dentro, el que está más adentro, es el P. The inner oval is the P, okay? Que representa ¿qué? La hipótesis. Y el que está afuera, mi gente, ¿cuál sería entonces? ¿Verdad? The outer, el que está más afuera, el óvalo que está afuera, sería ¿qué? La conclusión, okay? So we got to know where is P located and Q. Okay? This is another word we can write a conditional statement. Pregunta, mi gente, ¿estamos? ¿Están tan callados? No los veo. This is hard for me. ¿Estamos? Okay. Okay. So if an animal is blue, it's a blue jay, sorry, then it is a bird. Okay? That's a conditional statement that we can write. Okay? ¿Verdad? Estamos trabajando con este tipo de aves, ¿verdad? If an animal is a blue jay, we're talking about blue jays. That's the hypothesis, ¿verdad? If an animal is blue, ¿viste? ¿Qué hicimos? Usamos if. ¿Cuándo usamos if, mi gente? When do we use if? In the hypothesis or the conclusion? Where do we use the term or the word if? ¿Quién me dice? We use it in the hypothesis, okay? So this is the hypothesis that we wrote by looking at this diagram. So we can say that the conclusion is when we use the word then, it is a bird. ¿Okay? ¿Entendimos? Añadimos que then y añadimos if. Okay? So those two words, if and then, will help us achieve where is or locate where is the hypothesis and where is the conclusion. Okay? ¿Entendimos, mi gente? So this is another way we can write a conditional statement if we have a diagram like this. Okay? Es un diagrama. Okay? Esto se llama un Venn diagram. Okay? O un Venn diagram. Okay? Pregunta hasta aquí. ¿Estamos, mi gente? Okay. This video gonna be on YouTube also. Okay? Let's continue. Let's write a conditional statement from the sentence. Two angles that are complementary are acute. Okay. So reviewing, when we talk about complementary angles, that means that these two angles are gonna be, or the sum of two angles is gonna be 90 degrees. Okay. And when we talk about an acute angle, what was the measure of an acute angle? Can someone remember from your last test? What is an acute angle? ¿Alguien se acuerda? Acute angle is an angle that has a measure of. ¿Cómo era la medida de un ángulo acutado? Exacto, thank you. So if we say that two angles that are complementary are acute, let's see how we write a conditional statement. Okay. So identify the hypothesis and the conclusion. So the hypothesis is the first part. Two angles that are complementary are acute. So how can we write this? We can write it the following way. If two angles are complementary, then they are acute. You see how easy it is. What do we add to this statement? ¿Quién me dice? ¿Qué añadimos, mi gente? What do we add? We add the word if. That means this is, what is the first part of this conditional statement? This is the hypothesis. And what do we add on the other part? ¿Quién me dice, mi gente? What word do we add to this statement? ¿Qué palabra añadimos, mi gente? Empezamos añadiendo if. What is the other word that we add? Can someone tell me? Then. ¿Lo están viendo, mi gente? Es que se quedan callados, man. Dios mío. I need to see you. I need to hear you. So this is the conclusion of this conditional statement. You see, it's not hard. You have to identify the hypothesis and the conclusion, and then you can add if and then. So we have seen so far how to identify the parts of a conditional statement and how to write a conditional statement. Okay? Any questions about these two types of examples? How to identify a conditional statement and how to write a conditional statement. Okay? So this is very important that we know it. Okay? Let's continue. We're almost done for today. Let me see what else. So this is the last thing we're going to talk about this lesson. So a conditional statement has a truth value of either true or false. Okay. So a conditional statement can be true or false. So if it is false, only when the hypothesis is true and the conclusion is false. So that's very important. That happens in science. We can have a hypothesis. A hypothesis is a possible answer to a question. So the hypothesis can be false or can be true, but the conclusion of the hypothesis can be false. We can see that, okay? So to show that a conditional statement is false, you need to find only one counterexample, where the hypothesis is true and the conclusion is false. No sé si se acuerda, la pasada lección vimos esto, ¿se acuerda? If we got a conjecture, we can have a counterexample to a conjecture, okay? To make it false, okay? That means we got a counterexample, okay? So let's see this very quick. Determine if the conditional is true. If false, give a counterexample. So let's read it. Can someone read it? Déjame ver quién voy a enviar. Brianna, ¿puedes leer este ejemplo? Brianna. Brianna está ahí. Brianna no está ahí o se durmió. Ok. Julián, ¿puedes leerlo? Sí, léelo todo completo, sí. Y ajá. Ok, perfecto. No te preocupes, Brianna. Okay. So, gracias, Julián. So, we can say if two angles are acute, ¿qué significa eso? Que estos dos ángulos miden menos de 90. Then they're congruent. Eso siempre es cierto, mi gente. If two angles are acute, then they are congruent. Eso es cierto. Vamos a verlo. Una forma, ¿verdad?, de ver esto, you can have an acute angle with a measure of 80 and 30. In this case, the hypothesis is true, but the conclusion is false. ¿Por qué la conclusión es falsa? Porque, gente, no siempre son congruentes. ¿Qué significa que son congruentes? ¿Quién me dice? What is the word congruent means? Or what does the word congruent means? ¿Quién se acuerda? Congruent means they have the same measure. So not always two angles that are acute, they're gonna be congruent, okay? Because we have a case here, a counterexample, that you can have acute angles with the measure of 80 and 30, and they still acute, but they are not congruent, okay? ¿Entendimos? So for us to do this, we got to know basic geometric or geometry words or vocabulary from lesson 1 or from chapter 1, okay? So you can find a counterexample. So this is the counterexample. So the conditional is false. ¿Por qué falso, mi gente? Porque no siempre van a ser congruentes. En este caso lo vemos. We got a measure of 80 and 30 degrees. They are not congruent. One is bigger than the other one, okay? Lo podemos ver bien claramente, okay? Questions about this example. So this is how we can find a counterexample, okay? Vimos, no es difícil, mi gente, tiene que analizar, ¿verdad? Esta parte de geometría es mucho análisis, ¿verdad? Este capítulo 2 es análisis, que se llama Geometric Reasoning, ¿ok? Razonamiento geométrico. ¿Ok? Ok, vamos a ver este ejemplo. If an even number greater than 2 is prime, then 5 plus 4 is 8. Ok, vamos a ver esto. Te dice que if a number is greater than 2 is prime. Okay? So we can say that an even number greater than 2 will never be prime. Okay, so the hypothesis is false because 5 plus 4 is not equal to 8. Okay, gente, ¿cuánto es 5 más 4? 9. Pues ya vemos que eso es ¿verdad? Eso es falso, ¿verdad? That's wrong. So let's read again. If an even number greater than 2 is prime, then 5 plus 4 is 8. That's false, okay? And we can also say that an even number greater than 2 will never be prime. Okay? Pregunta hasta aquí. So the conditional is true because the hypothesis is false. Okay? So this is how we work. Let's do one more. Determine if the conditional is true or false. If a number is odd, then it's divisible by 3 is true. Okay? Vamos a verlo. Another number that we can have is 7. So it is not divisible by 3. ¿Por qué el 7 no se puede dividir por 3? If you divide 7 divided by 3, you're not going to have an exact answer, okay? Si usted hace eso en su calculadora o si usted lo hace, mira, si usted lo hace en la forma tradicional, espera un momento, dame hacerlo rapidito. ¿Dónde está el lápiz? Se desapareció el lápiz. Deme un break. Voy ahora, mira. Si usted divide, mira cómo esto si usted va a dividir el odd number 7, ¿verdad? Que es un impar. ¿Cuántas veces cabe el 3 en el 7? ¿Quién me dice? Rápido. 2, perfecto. ¿Y cuánto? La pregunta es, ¿sobra algo? We got a remainder o reminder. ¿Se acuerda de esto o no se acuerda? Exacto. So when that happens, we say that this number is not divisible by 3. Okay? ¿Por qué? Porque el 7 es un número primo. Okay? So the hypothesis is true, but the conclusion is false. Es verdad que el 7 es un número, ¿verdad? Odd is an odd number, but it is not divisible by 3. We can also see it with another odd number, 5. For example, if we choose 5, 3 ¿verdad? 5 is not divisible by 3. How many times does it fit? One time. But we want a remainder. So if that happens, it is not divisible by 3. ¿Entendimos, mi gente? Más o menos. Remember, you can use many examples, but you only need one counterexample, like we did on lesson 2.1. If you got a counterexample for the conclusion that makes the conclusion false, you're done for the example, okay, or for the exercise. ¿Entendimos? Pregunta hasta aquí. So basically, this is how we work to determine that a conditional, ¿verdad? The conclusion is false. Okay, vamos a ver qué nos falta. Okay, a conditional is a statement that can be written in the form if P, then Q. Okay, so hasta aquí vamos a llegar porque lo otro no lo vamos a ver. Okay, pregunta hasta aquí, mi gente. Okay, ahora voy a decirle qué tienen que hacer. Recuerde, lo otro de la lección no lo vamos a ver en clase formal. Okay, así que no